Hey Mr. Wannamaker, so I'm Adam Really, and this is my video about China and Japan and what led up to World War II. So talking about all the bullet points and information. So first of all, the Meiji Restoration, which began in 1868 and lasted until 1912, ushered in an era of social and political and economic and military reforms which they fundamentally altered Japan. The goal of these reforms was to remove the rigid influence of the feudal society which had existed in Japan for hundreds of years and integrate Western culture into Japanese culture. And as a result, Japan adopted a market economy that was much like America's. Political powers were centralized, and the so called Diet Legislature was created. The Meiji Constitution, however, limited because it still allowed the emperor to veto legislation created by the Diet, was made and said that the military responded to the emperor still, which it was not much like America's Constitution if you equate the emperor to the president, but the president is elected, the emperor is not. Um, Additionally, Japan's military, which was rapidly modernized through the implementation of German tactics and British help. Yeah. So, secondly, Shintoism, which was the established official state religion of Japan, began as a way to be different from Western culture. However, it did more than that. Shintoism promoted nationalist and imperialist ideologies in Japan. In doing this, Shintoism ushered in an era where many Japanese, such as the Amur River Society, um, believed which believed that it was Japan who should be the leader of Asia. This group's ideology became widely accepted in Japan, causing Japan to want to have even more influence on Russia, China, and the rest of Asia. From this also came the rising sun flag, the new national flag of Japan, which took place of the old one and signified Japan's rise in the world as a new world power. Um, uh, an additional proponent of Japan's new leader of Asia policy was Western racism. Every time Japan would move in and take over an area in China, Western countries would retaliate and force them to move back out, even though they won. So this really angered Japan and made them want to take over Asian countries even more. They would never even get the recognition they deserved. So Japan, like in the Sino-Japanese War, so Japan decided that they would have to do this on their own through their military intervention, and this furthered nationalist and imperialist tendencies. Thirdly, because Germany was distracted during World War I by the war at home, China decided to consolidate its economic and political influence in East Asia by moving into the territory of Shandong, China in 1914. After China moved into the area, they presented Yuan Shikai's government with 21 demands for more political and economic control in China. However, through pressure of other countries like the US, Japan decided to lower this to 13 demands, which Yuan Shikai government did actually agree to. By the early 20th century, the Qing dynasty had already been ruling for over 200 years, which was a very long time for Chinese dynasties. They were, and they were losing steam very fast. During the Opium Wars, for example, China was humiliated because it had been taken over by Britain and forced to do all these things that they didn't want to do. This was seen like give up Hong Kong. This was seen as one of the greatest failures of the Qing dynasty, and really put them in a low place in the people's eyes. They were not. This did not help them at all. Secondly, when Empress Dowager Cixi died in 1908, she was replaced by the 2-year-old and last ruler of China known as Puyi, Emperor Puyi. After just 3 years in power, localized rebellions occurred, and the last dynasty was taken out of power with a new central government put into place. Um, Chinese instability was rampant between 1900 and 1937. Firstly, the Boxer Rebellion, which it marked the beginning of this period. It began the withdrawal of Western powers out of China because they finally realized that their meddling in China's affairs was pointless if China didn't have any control over itself. Since Western powers started to move out, Japan determined that it was their place to fill the void left behind. So, after the Qing dynasty was destroyed and Sun Yat-sen came to place, came into power, who was basically the leader of the rebels. Uh, yeah. In order to create a new republican government, Sun compromised with his Yuan province counterparts because he needed their army and allowed one of their leaders to step up as the leader of the country. Right after he stepped down, he created a new political party called the Guomindang, which performed very well in the first election. When one of their prominent leaders was assassinated, however, Sun decided to execute a poorly planned revolution that backfired in his face, leading to his exile from China and move to Japan. This caused a lot more uncertainty in China, which Japan aimed to use to their advantage. Lastly, is Yuan. Yuan was the leader whose son stepped down to let him lead. He was the one issued with the 13 demands that he agreed to, even though it was extremely unpopular and actually led to a huge rise in Chinese nationalism. Everything backfired for him when he tried to become the new emperor of China a few years after he came to power. People did not support that in the slightest. And when he died, right after he did this, the government collapsed. No central government could be created to fill the void. So regional authorities came into power, known as the warlords. With China so divided, Japan had a very easy time taking over regions and asserting its economic and political influence on the nation. Next, in 1927, the ideological differences between the two parties of the Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party, CCP for short, became too stressed, and the parties could not put aside their differences to support a Chinese government that could hold them together. So a violent civil war began in 1927 when Jiang ordered the repression of the CCP in Shanghai. It was very violent, and it really made the CCP resent Jiang's party. This led to the abandonment of East Coast cities by the CCP and retreat to Jiangxi, which was in the west, where eventually they were forced to retreat even farther after the CCP forces broke through their defenses in the town, and they went on a long march, a trek through China, which was known as the Long March, from 1934 to 1935, to the Shanxi province, where Mao Zedong was finally able to take control of the party, and he was the one who ended up turning China into a communist nation. So lastly, the Great Depression hit Japan hard during its advent, causing people to lose faith in their government. How did it cause people to lose faith in their government, though? Well, with the onset of the Great Depression in the U.S., President Hoover decided that one of the ways that he would get the U.S. back on their feet was the implementation of the Smoot-Hawley tariff to increase the value of American goods. But this tariff hit Japan especially hard, and it actually caused many people to specifically lose faith in the U.S. as a trading partner, which did not go well for the government because they have finally emerged out of this era of isolationism just for them to be set back by the one country that they decided to trade with. So it did not help the government at all. And the government itself did not have a very good response to the crisis of the Great Depression as well, with many financial scandals being revealed during the time. These two things together led to the military having even more power in the nation as people lost faith in their government. And they really capitalized off of this. Lastly, with people vouching for Japanese expansionist policies as a result of the Great Depression, because they wanted to get back on their feet, they saw expansionism as a good way to do so. The military used this pretext to create the Mukden incident in 1931, where a bomb was blown up next to a Japanese train in Manchuria. The army claimed that this bomb was intentionally placed by resistance in Manchuria, and used it as a pretext to invade the state, furthering Japanese down a path of imperialism and military takeover that eventually led to World War II. So yeah, that's basically everything that I needed to talk about. Thank you.